Hey guys, fair warning, if you find yourself defensive about the world of pop culture and witchcraft or the witches of TikTok or the witches of Instagram or the cult of personalities that lead some folks to believe that certain elders of the craft are somehow sacrosanct and untouchable, then you're going to want to change the channel because on today's program, we're going to dig deep. We're going to talk openly about something that many of the occult and witchcraft community have struggled with for years. So if you're somebody who is deeply committed to cultivating your craft, if you're somebody who just doesn't have the time or the interest in the drama or the dress up or the pageantry and politics, or just the religious dogma and manipulation that marks so many of the 20th century neo-pagan traditions, then you might want to stay tuned. And if you were triggered by that last statement, then go ahead and change the channel. There is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of there. And if you want to join the conversation, to chime in, absolutely do so. You can do that in the comments, and I'll be trying to check the comments. In fact, I'll make sure I pull up the comments now as soon as we get back. And we are back. So first, let me remind you, because I seem to forget pretty often, to like and subscribe. And of course, feel free to share this broadcast with those that you think will vibe with it. We really appreciate that. And this is kind of off the cuff. This is, I didn't have a chance to even really make any notes, sticky notes to put around on the monitor. But for those of you who don't know me, lucky you. I'm Dr. John Michael Salvato. I'm a lifelong Italian witch, a folk magic and herbal medicine practitioner, conjure doctor, and a retired naturopath and anthropologist. And we do this show every other Tuesday as a way of covering some of the topics that may or may not be featured on our other program, Mosca and the Mystic, which as many of you know, appears every other Tuesday. And so we cover some of the topics that impact the lives of people who are on a personal healing and empowerment journey. So today we're going to talk about what I think everybody avoids, and that is the absurdity of the gatekeeping and the condescension and the condensation and the misinformation that it just poses as scholarship so often, that creates deep divisions in our community. And so it's not my intention to call anyone out. There's no particular individual or individuals that come to mind with this. It's just something that I see that recurringly happens on blogs and video broadcasts and conversations within our community. And so no matter what I say today, let me just be really clear that I believe it's really important for each and every one of us to respect others' rights to practice whatever spiritual path works for you. That said, please don't misunderstand what that means. And this is important. I respect your right to turn witchcraft into a religion. I respect your right to pretend that it was a religion in the ancient world, but that doesn't mean I feel compelled or have to respect the practice of doing so, or agree with the assertions that either stand in direct contrast to historic evidence or anthropologic evidence to the contrary, or things which I just believe are patent 20th century pop culture witchcraft lies. So I can respect your right to abide by the do's and don'ts of witches that are prescribed by a particular sect. It doesn't mean that I have to agree with those do's and don'ts. I respect your right to embrace your religion. I don't have to respect religion itself, and I don't. Full disclosure. I detest all organized institutional religions. I believe they're absolutely and essentially toxic. There is no reason for them. And again, you have a responsibility to respect my right to hold that belief. You don't have to embrace or respect my belief itself. So we want to get that out of the way. And to be clear, that doesn't mean that I don't embrace a religious path myself. If I did, I wouldn't talk about it publicly because it's nobody's business. And I'm disinclined to play the role of evangelist. So I'm not out there trying to make converts to John Michael's way of spirituality. I just can't even imagine wanting to do that. My interest and my focus and really my life's work for the past 40 years has been the authentic and historic practice of Italian hereditary folk magic, healing, and spirituality. That's pretty much it. I'm not at all interested in whether I meet anyone else's qualifications for calling myself a witch or a stregone or masca. I practice a shamanic path that honors the old traditions and that works with the old ones, but which dynamically evolved with me as a practitioner over the past 50 years. So my practice is not the practice of my ancestors. It's not the practice of the people who introduced me to the craft. It's not the practice of anyone else that may have had an influence, a powerful influence, an important influence on my life. It's my practice. And because for me, spirituality is something that should evolve as we evolve, then it's a reflection of where I am today, not even where I was last year, not where I was 15 years ago. Hey, Mary, glad that you're here. Glad you can catch us live as well. And Hearn, nice to see you again, my brother. And Steve, I am glad that you could join us too. And again, just to kind of remind everybody, you can join in, comment, whether you're watching on Facebook Live or you're watching on YouTube. I do try to get to all of the comments either before or after the show. They matter to me, and I don't do a great job of multitasking and both watching the monitor and then checking out the stream for comments, but I will do my best. So like my ancestors, I don't feel compelled to label my practice. It could be called stregoneria, it can be called witchcraft or mysticism or hedge witchery, root work or conjure. It could even be called some of the Catholic folk magic traditions at certain times, like Catholic conjure or segnatore. It could be called benedicaria. I'm really not interested in labeling my practice. I call it my way, just like my grandmother called it her way or our ways. My aunt would say, "Fallo Santucci," you do a little holy thing. And so the first matter that seems to arise all the time is this distinction, this imaginary distinction that people believe that exists between practitioners of folk magic and practitioners of ceremonial magic, the world of covens and initiatory magic. And so let's talk about that first, because I think that causes some division in our community. And so basically this is the idea. The idea is that somehow in the world of neo-paganism, and again, I'm not here to debate the sort of baseless idea that neo-paganism has any connection to the paganism of the ancient world. When somebody has actual evidence of that, they can certainly bring it to me, but I've never seen it. And in my second doctorate is in naturopathic medicine. My first doctorate's in anthropology. So, have at it. I just want to address the idea that somehow the neo-pagan world that involves covens and initiatory magic and all of that they're the only ones that have initiation, or that somehow that initiation makes you a better practitioner, makes you a better or more qualified witch. I'm not inclined personally to even address the absurd notion that there's such a thing as someone being an authority enough to determine whether somebody's qualified to call themselves a witch or not. To me, that's spiritual immaturity, and I don't even go there. And I have no desire to engage in debates with that. I will engage in discussion about why I think that with anybody who's interested. But the idea that initiation is important is a valid point. And I've heard other people that have talked about the importance of such things. Hello, Angela. Other people who've talked about certain things like the importance of initiation and how that gives us a framework to work within. And that's certainly true. But I want to be really clear. The people that have a notion that folk magic somehow is unrelated to their neo-pagan practices are kind of missing the point of history and tradition. Because without folk magic, without the animist practices, without the pre-neo-pagan practices that have been handed down, and we'll talk about that in a minute too, because some of the people out there who are talking about being hereditary witches are really get on my last nerve. We need to clear the air on what that really means. However, even in those folk magic traditions, in those shamanistic traditions, interculturally, there is initiation. Now, the initiation may not have the pageantry or the dress up or the eyeliner or the goth costumes and magical implements that can be found in the world of covens. And we may not run around saying "blessed be" and using an old form of English that just strikes me personally as being so fucking pretentious, because there's no reason, if I'm going to communicate with you, that I have to say "merry meet" when I can say "it's really great meeting you." And saying "it's really great meeting you" has more meaning because it's more authentic. It's not pretentious, because nobody says "merry meet" in the 21st century. So they have to pretend that they speak that way in order to say it. They may actually mean and authentically mean "it's good meeting you," but the moment that we have to say "merry meet," my response when somebody says that is, I just want to say, grow the fuck up. This isn't Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering. This is the real world. And if you're really happy to meet me, then let's just say "great meeting you," because I'm going to respond more warmly to that sort of greeting. And so just because we don't do all of those sort of things that you find in neo-paganism doesn't mean that those of us who grew up in a hereditary tradition weren't initiated. Our initiation, however, takes a lot longer than tradition in the sort of Masonically inspired 20th century paths, that have degrees of initiation and all of that. So let's understand that there's a place in the world for both of those. If your place in the world, if where you actually feel fed is by being part of a very structured, very dogmatic, highly controlled organization that has degrees of teaching and has a written and strictly adhered to curriculum, then it's probably true that for you, the place that you're going to find the most value, the most benefit in teaching is going to be in the world of covens and initiatory traditions. And we should all respect that. If you are a kind of person for whom religion, because let's face it, most neo-pagans come from the Abrahamic traditions, whether we like or want to admit that or not. And we bring baggage too, quite often. And some of that baggage is disdain or disgust with the way those Abrahamic traditions have treated us or treated those that we love. And so that leaves a void. And so that void is best filled by being part of another religion, sadly. I think that's a bit of a mental illness, to feel that I'm going to leave one disturbing religion and go to another. But it is what it is. And so if religion plays an important role and you need to worship somebody, you need to do rituals to be able to connect with the divine indwelling part of you, then that's probably the path that you want to take, that initiatory magical tradition. Now, for some people, that's going to be Wicca. For others, that's going to be traditional British traditional craft. For others, it might be Alexandrian witchcraft, depending on the degree to which you want some of that mythology to be weaved in. And then there's going to be some who find that they want the science of witchcraft, but they also want to have that connection to a religious tradition. And there are groups out there that do a beautiful job of that as well. In the Alexandrian tradition and in Laurie Cabot's tradition, you find both of those pieces, the scientific approach and the religious approach, the ceremonial approach. And let's face it, liturgy for some of us at certain times is a beautiful way to connect with other people. And even to connect with some people that we wouldn't connect with otherwise. But then let's also understand that there are other people out there who are not wired that way, who have no desire to worship anyone, who may or may not work with the spirits of the plants, or who may or may not work with some of what I call, in my tradition, the old ones, who are misunderstood as gods and goddesses. And there are those for whom the practice of the craft is purely and strictly scientific, follows scientific principles, understanding how to manipulate energy around people, places, and things in order to manipulate that or bend it to our will. And there ought to be a place in our world for that full spectrum of practices. So here's the first step. The first step is to let go of the bullshit that imagines that this is dualistic, that there's folk magic on one end of the spectrum and there's witchcraft on the other end of the spectrum, and that there's nothing in between. Because just as I identify as a non-binary person, just as I believe that spectrum is fluid, I also believe that the practice of magic is fluid. And for a lot of my life, I rallied against the notion that was promoted in the 20th century that never existed before that, where they took religion and they merged it with the practice of the craft. I hated that. I was a vocal opponent of doing that. I still am a vocal opponent of people doing that, but I've learned as I've gotten older to just respect that for some people that just works. I'll never understand why anyone embraces Wicca, but for some people it works. And so as we mature spiritually, I think we need to recognize that there is a spectrum and that people should have the freedom to move fluidly from one place to the other, depending on where they are at that point in their lives. So that's the first step. The second step is understanding that we have to respect everyone's right to be where they are and to practice what they practice, but we don't have to respect their practice. And we really ought not take our positions of power, our positions of prestige, our positions of authority, and use them to demean or diminish other people. So when we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about this principle of postmodern craft, postmodern witchcraft, or magic, or however you want to call it, a mystical tradition that moves beyond that place of drawing lines in the sand and condemning other people, and is guided more by compassion. So I want to bring you a message from an organization that I'm part of, that I love, called the Charter for Compassion. More on that when we get back.
The principle of compassion lies at the heart of all religious, ethical, and spiritual traditions,
calling us always to treat all others as we wish to be treated ourselves.
Compassion impels us to work tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of our fellow creatures.
To dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and put another there.
To honor the inviolable sanctity of every single human being.
Treating everybody without exception.
With absolute justice, equity, and respect.
It is also necessary in both public and private life.
To refrain consistently and empathically from inflicting pain.
To act or speak violently out of spite, chauvinism, or self-interest.
To impoverish, exploit, or deny basic rights to anybody.
And to incite hatred by denigrating others, even our enemies.
Is a denial of our common humanity.
We acknowledge that we have failed to live compassionately.
And that some have even increased the sum of human misery in the name of religion.
We therefore call upon all men and women to restore compassion,
to the center of morality and religion,
to return to the ancient principle
that any interpretation of scripture
that breeds violence,
hatred,
or disdain
is illegitimate.
To ensure that youth are given accurate and
I don't know what happened there for that to switch the way that it did. I must have twitched and hit the mouse. Anyway, we'll actually show that again at the end of our broadcast today. But you get the idea that it's probably time for us as a community to come together and to celebrate that diversity that existed in the ancient world, because that's the truth. So if at both ends of the spectrum, those of us that practice some of the older, the root work, the more animist practices, the shamanistic paths, really feel that connection to our ancestors and to our ancestral traditions. Let's let go of the bullshit there, because let's be really clear. It's not just those that are in the ceremonial and initiatory traditions who have to let go of the bullshit of drawing lines in the sand, because on the other side of the spectrum, there's those who run around telling everybody that they're a hereditary witch, as though being part of a hereditary tradition means that you somehow inherited magic through your bloodline, means that you somehow inherited your power, your gifts, if you want to call them. I think that's such a detestable idea, the idea of gifts. Nobody gifted me anything in this world, and I've never met anyone else who is given a gift. Everybody that I know that practices this craft works for the mastery of the skill that they employ in their craft. So I would love to see us let go of this bullshit about, oh, I have the gift of empathy, I have the gift of healing, I have the gift. Fuck you. Nobody has that gift, and nobody got it by their bloodline. So let's let go of that bullshit. Let's also let go of the bullshit that just because you're born into a hereditary tradition that you're somehow better than those who came in through initiatory traditions. And those who are in initiatory traditions, let's let go of the bullshit that says that you're somehow better than those who practice folk magic. Because both sides need to grow the fuck up. Both sides need to let go of that nonsense. And so we've got a comment here that says, I know an author who states that she comes from a line of gypsy witches and her grandma gives her spells in her dreams. And, if that's what she believes, more power to her. I'm never going to debate whether somebody speaks to their ancestors in dreams. I do it all the time. But just because she comes from a line of quote unquote gypsy witches, first of all, I'd have to question anybody who refers to themselves as a gypsy. That's a pejorative term. And being that one part of my family has a hereditary connection to the Romany tradition, it's unlikely that we would call ourselves gypsies. But do ancestors sometimes speak to us in our tradition, in our dreams? Yeah, I'm certainly going to tell you that happens to me. Whether they give you spells or not, that's not for me to judge. But pretending that we are superior, it is just as bad as pretending that the natural way to greet somebody is to say "merry meet," or to bless somebody is say "blessed be." And any more than it is in some traditions to imagine that the way to conjure a demon is to speak Latin, as though that was the very first language ever, and that demons all somehow took Latin in high school. Do you realize how stupid some of this stuff sounds? How childish and Dungeons and Dragon-esque, and how immature and insecure it sounds? I hope so. And I recognize that some of the times, some of these things that we see and read and hear on social media are coming from a generation that unfortunately grew up in a world where you got participation trophies, where nobody ever learned that sometimes in life you lose. Sometimes in life you have to work a little bit harder to get where you're going. So maybe for those people, they imagine everything that they experience is a gift, because most of those trophies in their childhood bedrooms weren't earned. They were participation trophies. But we as a people can grow the fuck up and start acting like carriers of the traditions that we embrace. And so that means that no, some of us are not going to post pictures of our altars or our workings, because in our tradition, that would be seen as being extremely dangerous and extremely foolish. Others may not embrace that idea at all. And so I don't feel compelled to tell somebody who's posting a picture of their working not to do it. If they're not in my tradition or not entrusted to my care as their teacher, it's not for me to tell anybody what they should or shouldn't do. In my classes, in the Stregoneria 101 class and 102 class, I definitely tell people what they should and shouldn't do, because they're actually engaged and committed to working with me as a teacher for a period of time. I'm no one's guru. I'm not going to be there for all eternity as the teacher for all time for somebody, but I will walk with you for a certain period of time, 26 weeks in the first class, 26 weeks in the second class. And by then, you should have a grasp of the foundational concepts that let you create your dynamic path for yourself. So this past weekend, we saw somebody who works probably harder than most people that I know in the modern American witch culture, who's done more for folks than just about anybody that I know. And I watched them get savagely, brutally, and unfairly attacked because a couple folks took something that they said out of context and tried to use it against them. And this is somebody that repeatedly gets attacked on social media. He's a big girl. I know he could defend himself. He doesn't need me to come to his defense or anyone else to come to his defense. But it was disgusting to watch the kind of nonsense, because he called somebody out for attacking him and referred to them using language that he may, personally feel sorry that he used. I personally have used that language, and it doesn't matter whether you're a male or a female. If you're acting like a cunt, you need to be called out as a cunt. But of course, then that was turned into, oh, and now you're also misogynistic and you're transphobic and you're this and you're that. When the context was taken, when the comments were taken out of context. And let's be clear, this is a person I've had my share of criticism for in the past, for real things and for things that I heard that turned out not to be real. So my encouragement is that we take this as sort of a teaching moment at a time when our world is going through a fucking pandemic, that we really consider doing what we can to help heal and alleviate suffering rather than causing more suffering. Stop drawing fucking lines in the sand. If you don't believe that people who are trained in folk magic traditions are as powerful as a witch as you, then go the fuck back to Oz and your initiatory tradition that didn't teach you well enough to know that there's no need to draw lines in the sand, that it's none of your business. If you don't like a particular witch on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or Twitter, disconnect from them. Get back to doing your practice, because together we can heal a lot more people with a diverse tapestry, a diverse approach. You don't think that somebody's binding Trump is the way to go? Then don't bind Trump and don't be part of their organization. And yeah, I think that there's a really good comment to be shared here that Anna just posted, saying some people want to see problems in everything and don't want to help. They just want to be angry. And that's when you walk away and stop trying to change their mind. It's true. You either want to be part of the problem or part of the solution. And so what I'm going to do is I'm reviving a group that is called the, I forget what it's actually called. I have to pull the banner back up to see what it is. It's a group called Thinking Magically, the 6 Dimensions of Wellness, where we take a look at some of the practices of the oldest traditions that were actually the healers, the mystics, the folks who helped as midwives to the newborn and midwives to the dying, and served their community, everything in between. We would call them in modern parlance the hedge witches. And that's certainly a part of my tradition, or the root workers, the conjure doctors. So my hope is that we can start to bring some people to the table who practice from different traditions, who can share those traditions, so that we can actually learn to put an end and heal the colonialism that steals from so many traditions, and show more respect to those traditions, and then find a path for ourselves in our tradition that's more authentic to us, to our journey, to be able to take the wisdom without stealing the tradition, without cultural appropriation. So that's what I wanted to share with you guys today. And so what I'm going to do as I close out, instead of putting the closing segment up, I want to put that Charter for Compassion segment up. It's only a minute and a half. I hope you'll stick around to watch to the very end, because this is my vision, this is my hope, my dream for the metaphysical community, the pagan community, the witches community, the Strega community, and everyone in between. Because if we can't do this, we have no business speaking on social media. This is Dr. John Michael Salvato, encouraging you to stay in the moment, to be grateful for the abundance that opens, the opportunities that open in that moment, and to always remember the best is yet to come. We'll talk to you soon.
The principle of compassion lies at the heart of all religious, ethical, and spiritual traditions,
calling us always to treat all others as we wish to be treated ourselves.
Compassion impels us to work tirelessly to alleviate the suffering of our fellow creatures.
To dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and put another there.
To honor the inviolable sanctity of every single human being.
Treating everybody without exception.
With absolute justice, equity, and respect.
It is also necessary in both public and private life.
To refrain consistently and empathically from inflicting pain.
To act or speak violently out of spite, chauvinism, or self-interest.
To impoverish, exploit, or deny basic rights to anybody.
And to incite hatred by denigrating others, even our enemies.
Is a denial of our common humanity.
We acknowledge that we have failed to live compassionately.
And that some have even increased the sum of human misery in the name of religion.
We therefore call upon all men and women to restore compassion
to the center of morality and religion.
To return to the ancient principle
that any interpretation of scripture
that breeds violence,
hatred,
or disdain
is illegitimate.
To ensure that youth are given accurate and respectful information
about other traditions, religions, and cultures.
To encourage a positive appreciation of cultural and religious diversity.
To cultivate
an informed empathy with the suffering of all human beings,
even those
regarded as enemies.
We urgently need to make compassion a clear, luminous, and dynamic force in our polarized world.
Rooted in a principled determination to transcend selfishness.
Compassion can break down political, dogmatic, ideological, and religious boundaries.
Born of our deep interdependence, compassion is essential for human relationships and to a fulfilled humanity.
It is the path to enlightenment and indispensable in the creation of a just economy and a peaceful global community.
Alchemy.